We might ask the question, are we reading prose here? Are we reading a narrative? Are we reading a poem? People have asked that question. But sometimes they ask it because they have an agenda, and they think that if you say, well, it's a poem, then that somehow lets you off thinking that it's true. There are actually poems about true things out there. And similarly, if you say it's prose, well, there are books of fiction. They're not true. So really, it's a misnomer of a question with respect to any truth claim about Genesis 1. But the form of Genesis 1 is interesting, and you might say that it's poetic prose. Or you might say that it's prosaic poetry, I suppose. In other words, it's got features of both. So it is prose, basically, but it has features which are like poetry. It's an intricate and elaborate chapter, and we can see that. Well, first of all, we've got this structure, haven't we? We've got this 7-day structure which has quite a definite form to it, and we have these repeated expressions, which tends to be a feature of poetry. And it was so 7 times. And God made 7 times. And God saw that it was good 7 times. An expression of naming or blessing after God's made something 7 times. And the evening and the morning were the X day, of course, appears 7 times because there were 7 days. And God himself, of course, as we've already said, appears in the chapter as a multiple of 7. The earth occurs as a multiple of 7. The heavens and the firmament together are a multiple of 7. So just, not that it matters that, those details, that any particular one of those details, but it just gives you a sense of the beauty and the intricacy that there is here, doesn't it? Just like, and we might say, so why is this? And I think that the why is so that the passage which describes God's creation of heaven and earth is like the God and the very heavens and earth that it describes. In other words, there is a mirror between the way the passage is written and the way the earth, the heavens and the earth, the creation as we experience it, as it actually is and as we perceive it. So, we get our microscopes out and we look down and you can see this incredible beauty that you didn't realize was there on the surface level, or you can get your telescope out and you can go in the other way, can't you? And there are these wonderful things that can be seen. And so it is with the very passage that describes the creation of those wonderful things. The one resembles the other, and it makes sense that it would be like that. And just one other example along those lines. So we come to the 7th day, which of course is the day of rest, isn't it? The Sabbath. And we've got 3 phrases that are used, and here's one of them. And on the 7th day, God ended the work which he had made. And that has exactly 7 words in Hebrew. And he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had made, which has 7 words in Hebrew. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. Also has 7 words in Hebrew, which just gives you that there is that beauty in the very way in which Genesis 1 is written. So we see that then as a reflection of how the world is, because the world itself is an expression, just as Genesis 1 is an expression of God. But there's something also in the order of it, in the structure and the shape. It isn't like God just randomly does something, is it? There's very clear order in the way in which the chapter is written, and the order too, the structure in the world, reflects the God who gave it that structure and reflects the world which has that structure. And it must be like that, mustn't it, for the world to work. If there was not structure and order in the world, you couldn't have science, could you? If you boiled water 1 minute and it would boil at 100 degrees, and then the next time you boiled it boiled at 50 degrees, that would be a problem, wouldn't it? And all kinds of machinery and systems that we have in the world would fail, wouldn't they? And everything would come to a grinding halt if the laws of the world did not have the order and the structure that they do. So God has built those things into creation, and we see that set out for us in the very way in which Genesis 1 is constructed. You could not have science, could you, if there was not order and structure in the world, just as there is in Genesis 1. So that then reveals something to us about God, doesn't it? That God is not a sort of a maverick, just, this. That he won't do one thing one day and another day he'll do something different, that's not consistent. So we learn about this consistency of God and structure. But again, we were talking about it a little bit in the earlier session. That's not all that Genesis 1 says about God. It also reveals his artistry, doesn't it? And in a way, the excess, in a good way, the excess of God. God is not a minimalist, is he, in the creation that we see around us. It's not like, these Danish interior designers of furniture. You see them on the back of fancy magazines, don't you? Polyform and I can't remember the other brands off the Lean Rosse, is it? You see them on the back of magazines, and these lounges that have like one sofa in and nothing else, like as if anyone's lounge is actually like that. And the world we live in isn't like that either, is it? Because God is super abundant in what he has created. So we have in the world today, apparently, something like 8.7 million different species. You could imagine if you or I had been asked to create something, and suppose we got as far as thinking, well, let's have some birds, and let's have some fish, and let's have this, and let's have that, and should we have 10 of each maybe, or 50 if we were feeling generous? But God has gone way past that, hasn't he? Almost beyond our ability to comprehend and imagine it. So there is then something sort of a spontaneous creativity here. He has created extravagantly, hasn't he? The human eye apparently is able to detect differences between something like between 7 and 10 million different colors. And of course, we don't have that many words for different colors, and yet we can tell the difference between them. And God has used all of those colors, and more perhaps that we can't even detect in the world in which that he has made. So there is this lavish artistry, isn't there, about God? So we've got these two things then, and again, we said before, we might tend to one pole or the other. You might be more the sciencey type of logic and reason and bullet points, or you might be more the creative, artistic type. But both of those actually are to be found in our world and are necessary in our world and are reflective of the God who made us. And that's wonderful, isn't it? So it's great to be arty. It's great to be theoretical, as long as we don't start denying the other, because these are both aspects of the God who has made us. So we have beauty and functionality, don't we? We have power, we have logic, and we have grace and artistry expressed in our world. One of the ways in which that is captured, that lavish aspect of creation, is in it's really within those verses that we've just read. Should we just scan again very quickly a couple of those verses? So let's come in at verse 28. So God tells them to be fruitful and multiply, and then verse 29, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every plant for food. It's hard to think how you could pack the word all or every any more into that verse than it's there. And there's a whole load of verses like that. I think it's 19 times or something, the all or every, which just emphasizes, doesn't it, how magnanimous God has been, how lavish he has been. This is a cup running over and then some, which again tells us something about what sort of people we should be then, and what it might mean to be godlike in the way in which we are. So structure and order is important, but generosity is important as well, isn't it? What about the animals then? Well, when we think about the animals, there are some particular expressions that come to mind. And perhaps the most notable of them, apart from the all and the every, is this phrase, after their kinds. So it's one way of thinking, a giraffe will beget a giraffe, won't it? And it won't beget a horse or a whale. So it's after its kinds. And the fruit has seed in itself after its kind, so it can perpetuate itself. So in a kind of way, each of the animals is in its box, isn't it? And there is a box for giraffes, which has the properties, and all giraffes then have the property of giraffeness, don't they? Whatever that is, and we could define that in different ways. Obviously, the most obvious way is having a long neck, but there'll be other aspects, of course, that define what a giraffe is. But it's after its kind, and that's a different kind to a whale, for example. So then we come to ourselves, and now the phrase after its kind is conspicuous by its absence, isn't it? What happened to the kind then? Where did the kind go? What kind am I might ask, and you might ask it as well. You might ask it about yourself. We want to understand ourselves, don't we? Who we are and what we are. And of course, in the world outside those who believe in God and listen to the Bible, there is a narrative about who we are and where we came from and what potential we might have. But it's a narrative ultimately which is unfulfilling and which fails to truly capture the wonder of what it is to be human. I was on a plane recently going to Australia, and we'd taken off probably about half an hour into the flight or something like that, and we come around with the trolley, and I get my tomato juice and a bag of sour cream and onion pretzels. Fantastic. And I start enjoying my pretzels, and I just happened to look up, and I see a whole cabin of 10 seats across by how many rows there are in front, and everybody's doing this, compulsively eating their sour cream and onion pretzels. And it's like we can't help ourselves, And for me, that was just like a snapshot of what makes us like the animals. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I get up and go downstairs, and the dog is right there, and she's going to have her food, and she's not going to be happy until I give her a breakfast. And I'm not going to be happy until I have my breakfast either. And whenever anything's going on in the kitchen, it's not long before I'll be trotting through to see what's going on and if there might be something for me. So in that respect, we are like the animals, aren't we? And yet, the instinctual, driven by instinct to reproduce, to survive, to eat, to drink, we're born and we die like the animals do. So much then we have in common with them, and yet how much difference. And I'm sat there looking over some notes that I'm going to be going through in the talks I'm going to give in Australia. And someone else is there reading a piece of fiction, science fiction about a world that could not possibly exist. And yet this book that captures the imagination has been written, and someone sat there reading it. And someone else is there on their laptop composing a symphony. And someone else is there learning a foreign language. And someone else is there just daydreaming, imagining a holiday they had 30 years ago. And it's real and vivid in their mind. These are just some of the things, aren't they? These are just some of the things that human beings can do that are completely different, on a completely different order to what the animals can do. And I think that's captured for us in Genesis 1. The animals and human beings are created on the same day. We have that in common with them. Food is provided for us just as it is provided for the animals. And, it's the same provision of food in those verses that we've just looked at and read, isn't it? For the animals and for the humans. And we are blessed, and the animals are blessed. And as we've already said, we reproduce, they reproduce. There is to be this fruitfulness and this filling of the earth by the humans and by the animals. And yet, such differences there are captured here. We are not made after our kind. We are not defined then in terms of ourselves. So we cannot get a collection of human beings and say what that is just by looking at human beings. We can do that with a collection of giraffes, and we can say, they all have long necks. But we can't do that with human beings. We will not fully understand who we are, where we came from, and what we are meant to be just by looking at one another or doing scientific experiments or doing psychological experiments. Because we are to be defined, we are to find ourselves only in relation to something else. Not after our kind, but after his kind. And that's the power, isn't it? Not that expression is used, but to mark that contrast. Let's look at that. Verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. So there is now to be a vertical relationship, just as God is the author of everything, and of course that is a vertical relationship, isn't it? There's God, and then there's everything else underneath. But now with the human beings in his image, there is to be a vertical relationship there, in which the human beings are to have dominion over the other things that God has created, the fish, the birds, and the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So it's said it once, hasn't it? Let us make man in our image. So God created man in his own image, verse 27. There it is the second time. In the image of God, he created him. There it is the third time then. 3 times that we are in the image of God. And what that means then is that we can only truly understand ourselves, who we are, and who we are called to be by thinking about God. We can only understand ourselves in relation to him. So it's quite a good thing that Genesis 1 tells us a lot about God, isn't it? Because that's going to help us in thinking about ourselves and our own potential. And it's very carefully worded. We are not God, are we? We are in the image of God. There's a step removed, and it's a big step. It's a big step. We are in the image of God. So there is a resemblance, there is a likeness then between ourselves and God, but there is also a distinction because we are the creature and he is the creator, and it's an absolutely massive and fundamental distinction. So we're going to need to think more about what it means to be in the image and likeness of God. But before we do that, I'd like us to just take a moment again to put we've talked about worldviews, haven't we? And what we're trying to do here is build a biblical worldview. That's why Genesis 1 was written, to build a theological, God-centered worldview for ourselves. Let's just put that on one side for a second and say, well, what happens if we don't have that? How do human beings understand the world then? What might that worldview look like? And what might its implications be? And how would we compare and contrast those two worldviews? Well, human beings tell stories about that, don't they? The whole evolutionary narrative is a story about where we came from, who we are. And it's a story that emphasizes how we are like the animals. And this has been going on for years, hasn't it? Some of you might remember that book, Desmond Morris, was it? The Naked Ape. And, that, and what that worldview does is it diminishes human beings, doesn't it, to being glorified animals, or animals who just got a little bit further on the evolutionary ladder. And it emphasizes what we have in common with the animals. But that's a very reductive and disappointing narrative, isn't it? It's like saying, well, all there is about human beings is the fact that they sit on planes and do this, stuff themselves with sour cream and onion pretzels. Is that all we want to say? Actually, no, that's the least interesting part of human beings. The most interesting part comes when you compare the literature of human beings with the literature of dogs. And you find that the literature of dogs is not very good. It doesn't even exist, does it? So we have all these amazing capacities that the animals don't have. Why is that? There isn't a compelling answer to that. And it's not compelling to us in terms of where we came from, but it's also not compelling in terms of what it calls us to be. It doesn't call us to be anything in particular, does it? And we know, if we really think about it, that it doesn't work, does it? It's not a satisfying narrative. So let's just think about that for a second. Let me start again. Human beings don't have an issue with animals who prey on other animals, do we? So when a lion eats an antelope or whatever it eats, I was never great at biology. Human beings accept that as well. That's animal behavior. That's the food chain, and that's how things work there. And when two deer or animals go against, or stags go against one another or fight one another, sometimes to the death, for the purpose of being the top of the tree and mating with who they choose to mate with, we accept that that's how things are amongst animals. But when human beings trample on the rights of other human beings, we feel that's wrong somehow, don't we? We feel that's an injustice. Why is it okay in the animal world and not okay in the human world if all human beings are, as like just one stage further, developed animals? There's no convincing basis for saying that a human life has value and should be treated differently from an animal, which is exactly what we want to say. Human beings are not like lions or antelopes. They're not like stags facing off against one another. There may be times when human beings display those behaviors, but we should be more than that. We should be better than that. That's what our instinct tells us, doesn't it, about what it is to be human. Why is that? Well, it must be because there's some value in human life. But if all we are is an animal, then there isn't any more value than there is in the antelope or the stag, is there? So you've got a big problem if you don't have the worldview of the Bible. If you don't have God to ground what human beings are and should be, then you don't have a basis to explain what we all instinctively feel, that there is value in human life. There is dignity to it, and that should be respected. There's no doctrine for that over here, and yet there's a doctrine for that in the Bible on page 1. Why should we not trample on the rights of other human beings? Why should we not kill and maim them? Because they are in the image of God. and so are we. And that doctrine is set out on the very first page. And again, it's such a powerful doctrine because it is the basis for everything about how we ought to treat one another and about how we ought to treat ourselves. That we should not abuse our bodies or treat them like, pieces of meat, that we're just, flesh, because we are something that reflects something more important than ourselves. We are his creation and we are in his image and likeness. And that is such a powerful basis, isn't it, for grounding a morality and an ethical code about how we should treat one another and how we should treat ourselves. So if we don't believe that, we end up saying that really all a human being is just a sack of chemicals, just a biological creature marching to the drumbeat of its DNA. That's a pretty depressing picture of what it is to be a human being, isn't it? But that is ultimately where that worldview without God takes you. You have no basis for proper treatment of human beings without that. And let me just illustrate that in a different way. So what are some of the models? So we have the correct model in the Bible, don't we? The correct doctrine that we are in the image of God. What are some of the other doctrines? Well, one doctrine is that one false doctrine about human beings is that we're basically machines. We're basically algorithms, and that's the marching to the drumbeat of your DNA thing again. And if that's what human beings are, machines, then if you happen to be in power, then why not put them all in a factory and make them do cruel labor like Pharaoh did and just mistreat them so you can maximize the number of bricks that you're producing. And when they can no longer make bricks, well, they've served their purpose and they can go on the scrap heap just like a machine can go on the scrap heap when it doesn't work anymore. Bit horrible, isn't it? Yeah, it is horrible. It is horrible. That's the logical consequence of if you think of human beings in that way, as being basically machines. And similarly, if you think of them as basically just animals, biological robots, it takes you nowhere good in terms of human behaviors. And it certainly doesn't take you to anywhere aspirational, does it? About what we might hope to be and what we might achieve. I felt it was important to spend some time on that, just to remind ourselves that on so many levels we have such a rich understanding from the scriptures, don't we, of everything really, of everything that God created in the beginning, of what the world is, of what the animals are, and the respect that should be afforded them, but even more so, because we are in his image, the dignity of other human beings and how they should be treated. So this then is why we place value upon humans. And it's still true. So it is the case, of course, that there was the fall, and that when that Adam subsequently bore a son in his own image. That's a deliberate contrast, isn't it, to Genesis 1 that we have in Genesis 5. So there's something now that is, in a sense, more human, more like our ancestor. And yet, so you could say from that, well, does that mean we're not in the image of God anymore? And the answer to that is no, it doesn't mean that. And we know that because in Genesis 9, God says to Noah that we should not take the life of another human being. Why? Exactly what we've been talking about with the antelopes, because we are in the image of God. And what right do you have to take the life of something or someone that's in the image of God? So we know it from Genesis 9, and we also know it from James, because we have a tongue with which we can bless with which we can bless God and with which we can curse man who is in the image of God. So it's still true. So perhaps a way that we might say that is that it's a marred image, it's a cracked image, it's a blurred image, but there is still in a human being something which is in the image of God, even though we are also in the image of the parents who bore us and with all that corruptible nature that we inherit. Well, let's think then about what it means to be in the image of God. And the passage doesn't specify it, doesn't it? Does it? It doesn't say, well, you are in the image of God because you can construct a very complicated grammatical sentence. Or, you are in the image of God because you can do quadratic equations. Or because you can create a piece of artwork. Or because you can play the violin really well. It's not the having of one particular skill. There's a whole set of attributes, in a sense, that are reflective of this God who is so lavish and gracious, which enable us to understand something, again, of what God must be like, because in some way we have this capability of speaking his glory, just as the stars and the planets and the mountains and the animals speak his glory, as we saw in Psalm 19. So what might be some aspect then? Not that we have to have any one of these to any particular degree. We don't have to be able to read, do we, for example, for us to still be in the image of God and to be able to receive the hope of salvation and to serve God. But there are a collection of attributes, in fact, that distinguishes so notably from the animals. So we've talked already, haven't we, about creativity and artistry and music, art, woodwork, car design, whatever it might be. This ability to have a blank sheet of paper and then it to become something that it was not before is an incredible thing. This ability to have aesthetic values and to appreciate art, even if you can't, or appreciate design and form, even if it's not something that you can produce yourself. So that might be one thing. There might be logic and reason. That we've talked about the order that there is in creation, the structure that there is, and science shows us that the world that God has created, in a sense, speaks the language of mathematics, doesn't it? There's a logic there. There is a language of maths that underpins so much of what we see in the world around us. And to a greater or lesser degree, human beings are capable of appreciating that language, of speaking it. Not to the degree that God can speak it, of course, but to some degree. We have relational capabilities, emotional and psychological capabilities that reach far beyond the animals. And of course, the most important of those relational capabilities is that spiritual need that we have, that spirituality, that sense that there must be more to life than this, that tends to be characteristic of human beings. And some human beings, even though, they may believe or they may claim that we're just a sack of genes marching to the drumbeat of our DNA, they still nevertheless try to find something to give their life meaning. And, they may find it in family, or they may find it in their work and their career, or in playing lots of rounds of golf or whatever it is. But none of those things can truly satisfy. C.S. Lewis described it as human beings have this God-shaped hole in their hearts. We were designed for fellowship with him, to link to him, to be in relationship with him. My heart is pained, we sing, don't we? Nor can it be at rest until it find rest in thee. While I seek and find thee not, no rest is it, my wandering heart shall prove or find, or something like that. You know the hymn. And it's just capturing that truth, that we all worship something. And people who don't believe in God, we have this need to worship something, and we worship our careers or materialistic things or family, whatever it might be, but true fulfillment, a place where we really find ourselves and where we find what we are called to be, is when we come to have a relationship with God. Moving on then in our thinking of some of the aspects of what it means to be in the image of God, we could think of language, that ability to tell stories, to speak of future worlds that don't exist yet, of past worlds, of worlds that could never exist. And to call things, to say this is this and this is this. That's something that God does in Genesis, and we now do that as human beings, don't we? As we discover things about our world. And God, of course, invited Adam, didn't he, to name the animals, to call them by their names that he chose to call them. Then there is the moral sense that human beings have. We've spoken about that a little bit, that, there's something in us that cries out when we see oppression and injustice in the world. And yet we also have this ability to know that something is wrong and to choose to do it anyway. That perverseness within us, which is interesting. But of course, that rests on this ability to divide and to say this is this and this is that, which comes from God. We can then be more than our instincts, can't we? I can deny myself those pretzels if I choose to do so. And I can occupy myself on other things. Such a critical difference to the animals, that, isn't it? To be able to make those choices, to have free will, to have agency. We talked about God having agency and choosing to show that grace in creating the world. And we have it too. It's interesting, there seems to be a tendency in the modern world to deny that agency. I mean, it's a real denial of agency, isn't it? To say that all a human being is an algorithm, a sack of chemicals, that we are defined by our DNA, or actually that we are defined by our socio-economic, where we are in the socio-economic hierarchy, or where we grew up, or what happened to us in our childhood, or what mental health issues we might have. All of those things, and mentioning mental health, I'm not suggesting that mental health issues are not a real thing, but we live in a world now where something like 60% of all students, of all kids in America have some mental health illness or other, and 40% of them are on medication for their mental health. So, if that feels like we went too far with that, doesn't it? And all of those things, whether it's blaming DNA or my socioeconomics or my childhood or whatever it is, those are all things that put people in boxes and say, after that kind, after that kind, and after that kind. And the Bible does not do that to us, does it? Instead, God gives us free will. Now, of course, all of those things, how we are made, our background, that will impact the choices that we make, and it may make it harder for us to make some choices than other choices. But we do have the ability to make choice and to not do what comes naturally to us, or what everyone else in our socioeconomic background might happen to be doing. That's incredibly empowering, isn't it? We're reminded of that. Some of you may have heard of Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps. And, if ever there was a situation where you are in a box and you have no autonomy and you have no ability to determine almost anything about what happens to you and what your life is like. He's written some very interesting books. One of them, very short book. I can't just remember the title off the top of my head. But if you look for Viktor Frankl quotes, you'll see some very powerful quotes when you think of a man in that circumstance who recognized that actually the attitude he had about and his response to the things that he suffered was not, no one else could control that. That was under his control. He had the power to choose how he would respond and the attitude he would have, even in a circumstance more difficult than we can perhaps ever imagine. So that culture that we live of, blame this, blame that, which of course goes back to Genesis 3 and the fall, doesn't it? Of, well, let's blame someone else, the woman or the serpent or whatever. Actually, the Bible tells us that we have the freedom and the ability to choose. And not only the ability to choose, but also the ability to change. And that's a wonderful thing. And again, it relates to this point of we are not in a box of kinds. We have the ability to learn and to grow, and to some degree to make of situations what we choose to make them. And of course, we can see the human ability to change in the way technology is developed, in the way that cultures change, in the way that philosophical views have developed. Human beings have the ability to shape their world in a limited sense, don't they? Not of course, the ultimate abilities that God has, but he's delegated some of those abilities to us. We have the ability to shape and also to be, it's a dichotomy, because we have the ability to shape and to mold, but we also have the ability to be molded, don't we, to be passive. And really that brings then this point of this dichotomy that we are like the animals, and yet we are also in the image of God. And really, like if you had to say in one sentence, what is the conundrum of human existence, that's it, isn't it? That we are caught in the middle, a bit like Absalom when he was caught in his tree, like such a beautiful man with beautiful hair, he could have been so great. He had every opportunity, didn't he? And yet he suffers the fate of beasts, and he dies like one, doesn't he? One who is in honor and understands not. If you don't have that relationship with God, then you are like the beasts that perish. Like sheep, they are laid in the grave, it says. So, if all I want to do is eat the pretzels and follow my instincts, well, that's a choice that's open to me. And so if I want to be with the animals, I can be with them. But God gives us this incredible opportunity, doesn't he, of saying you can be more than your instincts. You can be more than what comes naturally. You can be like the very God in heaven who has created you. And the specific aspect of what it means to be in the image of God, which Genesis 1 picks up, is none of those that we've discussed. Let's have a look at what it is. Back to verse 26. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. So it's back to that vertical relationship then, isn't it, between the man and the woman and the rest of the creation. And then we get God created man in his own image. And then in verse 28, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea. So that's repeated, isn't it? So we've got, let us make man in our image to have dominion. Then we've got man created in the image of God. And then we've got a blessing and have dominion. So dominion is the important concept here, isn't it? That Genesis 1 draws our attention to. Well, we've already tangentially mentioned the fallen dominion that human beings have exercised over the resources and the natural world of creation in which we live. Don't need to say any more about that just now. But God's given us this incredible opportunity then of having dominion. Psalm 8 talks about it, doesn't it? What is man that you are mindful of him? You have given him this dominion. So Psalm 8 is a kind of an exposition in a way of what we're reading here in Genesis. That's one level of what Psalm 8 is about. It's about other things as well. So there's this dominion, and we can see Adam having dominion in the garden and what that would have meant in that early society of human beings as they were then expelled from the garden and went out to establish their lives. But the point, of course, is that we all have dominion to a degree, don't we? And we think of the parables that speak of the Lord going away and leaving his servants with a dominion to exercise. We would call it stewardship. Stewardship is about having a responsibility, and whether we're considered important or unimportant in this world's eyes, we all have a dominion of some degree, don't we? We have a set of things, including our own physical, our money and our goods, but also our time and our attention, our faculties, the abilities that God has given us, the sphere of influence in which we live. We have a stewardship to exercise over those things, and we can exercise it in a cruel and a selfish way, as there are many examples in Scripture and in human history, or we can try and exercise it in a godlike way. The choice is there, isn't it? And that choice is part of what it is to be in the image of God. So let's draw our thoughts to a conclusion then, and I want to do that by a piece of archaeology actually, and it's just a little picture which may be helpful. Back in 1979, a Syrian farmer unearthed a statue, and it was a life-size likeness of an Assyrian governor whose name was, I'm not quite sure how to print. I can't quite remember. So Hadad Yishi or Hadad Yisi, and he had an inscription with him, and it was written in Aramaic and in Assyrian, and not in Hebrew. But as you might know, a lot of those ancient languages, they're very similar to one another. A bit like French is similar to Spanish and is similar to Italian, and they have a lot of words that are the same. And this is the only inscription that we have in the ancient world that brings the equivalent two words of image and likeness together in the same place. And of course, they're the words, aren't they, of Genesis 1, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Now, that may just be coincidental. We don't know how widespread the existence of these lifelike statues with image and likeness inscriptions were. But even if it is a coincidence, I just think it gives us a little picture which might be useful. Now, the idea, seemingly, of these statues was that, the governor would put them at various points around the province or the kingdom, and it would be like a reminder to everyone that, remember, this isn't your province. This is the province of Hadad Yishi or Yisi, and that he's watching. And so they would be there then as a reminder of him. Now, in false religions, of course, and that whole thing of the use of icons in churches, again, the notion there is that you look at the icon and that reminds you of God. But of course, God has told us not to make things in the likeness of anything, has he? Not to have these icons, not to have images and likeness of things as part of our worship. Why not? The answer is because God already has things in his image and likeness. God doesn't need statues around the place to remind us. We are the ones in his image and likeness, and we specifically now, as Christadelphians, are to be that kingdom of priests, aren't we? That holy nation. We are to be his representatives in the earth, not as icons, not as inanimate statues, but as living, breathing, communicating people in his image, manifesting, we pray, what he is like in the world in which we live. In that sense, then, a human being who is trying to live in the image of God might even be said to be iconic. So then, where does this go? It's one of the themes, isn't it, that goes right the way through the scriptures. We've thought of James in Genesis 9. There were some references to the image and the hymn. We picked up in other places in the New Testament. But of course, God has showed us most powerfully what it means to be in his image by sending his son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Shall we just look, or just feel free to listen if you like. Let's close with those incredible words of Hebrews chapter 1 that reminds us of the perfection of his son. not now a marred or a blurred image, but a perfect representation of his heavenly Father. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake unto the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world. He is the brightness of his glory and the express image, the perfect representation, the express image of his person, and the one who upholds all things by the word of his power. So we thought about some of the human aspects of what it means to be in the image of God. But it's our task, isn't it, for all of us to look to the Lord Jesus Christ as our perfect example and to try to be like him.